Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. He's the head of the Pope's doctrinal office in Rome. He's making headlines this week with a book he wrote 25 years ago on spirituality and sexuality. 9 dioceses in France at the same time have announced they will resist the new Vatican's directive on blessings of same-sex couples. Here with analysis, the Papal Posse. Editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, joins me on set, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, is in New York. Happy New Year, gents. I'm so glad we could convene once again. I want to start with this controversy that's erupted around this book written by Cardinal Fernandez, the Vatican's chief of doctrine. It's called Mystical Passion. It's mystical, all right. Spirituality and sensuality. And I have to say, it features a lot of blush-worthy descriptions of human sexuality, spirituality, including an imaginary erotic sexual encounter with Jesus himself. Father, I'm going to spare the audience the pornographic language of this book, but at one point Fernandez likens the encounter with God to having an orgasm in gratuitous detail. Your thoughts when you saw this story emerge?
Yeah, this is shameful garbage. The fact that he wrote this, he's a priest, and he's writing about sexual experience as a person who has knowledge of it. It's most disedifying. It reveals to me he's got unhealthy preoccupations. He's certainly not upholding Catholic standards of morality and decency in the way he writes this. And, it's a fascinating study of a man who is supposed to be the guardian of orthodoxy, that when this book was brought to his attention, after it was, put out on the internet just the other day, he said he didn't renounce the book. He said, I just wouldn't have written this today. Yeah. It seemed like a good idea way back when. He's not distancing himself from the book, and he took measures to try and hide it after it was published, saying it could be misinterpreted. No, the problem is not it's going to be misinterpreted. The problem is people are going to read it for what it says and realize that this is a man propagating an immoral view of human sexuality. And then the other thing is this false mysticism. There's always been a history in the Church of heretics who bring forth an unhealthy preoccupation with sex and then link it somehow to experience of the divine. This is not what the Catholic Church teaches about modesty and about the relationship between God, creation, and how we're supposed to approach him. Yeah, but
Bob, it made me think of Rupnik, who we've been reading so much about, who had his own very perverse ideas about art and sex. I can't even talk about the way he used bodily fluids and mingled them with sacraments. It was disgusting. But Fernandez is attempting to pass this book off, as Father said, as something he wrote in his youth that he wouldn't write now. But subsequently, he wrote that book about kissing that was scandalous. Do you buy any of this?
Well, I actually think it was before this book that he wrote the one which is called Heal Me With Your Mouth, which he said was not a book of theology. Yeah, it very clearly isn't a book of theology, but was intended to help young people, like this book was intended to help married couples. Yeah. I don't think, by the way, I only have read about 4 chapters of the book, but it's interesting that sexuality for him has nothing to do with reproduction, with having children, with founding a family. It is a very kind of abstract pursuit of pleasure. Right. Even though I have to be fair to him. He says, this is not masturbation where you're by yourself. This is not mutual exploitation. But where is the procreative element in this type of sexuality? And the other thing is this. I think that the Holy Father could not help but have known about these proclivities, if we want to call them that, when at that point in his life, because the book, Heal Me With Your Mouth, was so notorious that it was actually a joke on one of the soap operas in Argentina. They call them telenovelas, but it was well known that a priest had written this book about kissing, and they would make jokes about it. So, you can say that he wouldn't write it now. It would have been a better idea not to even have written it back then.
Yeah, well, but the idea that the Pope didn't know about this, or people didn't know, clearly this fixation was well established long before this book reemerged. Father, years ago, Fernandez was not approved by the Vatican to become rector of the Catholic University in Argentina. Could this book have had something to do with that Passover, if you will? And why wouldn't it have been a factor in his appointment as head of the Vatican's doctrinal office?
Yes, well, this was under the previous pope that he was denied that position. It was eventually given to him. And you remember, as soon as Pope Francis was elected, he promoted Cardinal Fernandez now to become a bishop. And then he favored him by making him archbishop of a big diocese. And then he favored him even further by bringing him to Rome. This man is manifestly unqualified to carry out the job he's been given. And it's scandalous to the world that the man who's supposed to uphold the sanctity of the Word of God treats the subject of our divine Savior as a subject for a pornographic fantasy involving an underage child or 16-year-old girl.
Bizarre.
As described in this book, it's disgusting. Yeah. If he doesn't renounce this kind of garbage that he's putting out, that means he's implicitly affirming it. This is ridiculous. This man should hang his head in shame and resign his office.
Bob, given the massive scale of the abuse crisis, how was this book seemingly not a factor in the appointment of Fernandez? And I mean, for a cleric to write about, genitalia, erections, I can't really describe it or read it. I was going to put quotes up, but it's too filthy to put quotes up. Why should I destroy our airtime? Why did this set off no alarms?
That's a very good question. I have to think that he very quickly realized that he'd made a big mistake. But he said he withdrew the book and he didn't want it to be republished because it might be misunderstood. Now, that said, everybody still has a track record. And some track records, all of us are flawed. We know we're all sinful. But some of the track record kind of, you have to say, it kind of disqualifies you for further steps along the pathway toward promotion within the church. And yet, somehow, after having these two rather salacious publications early on in his life, even if he went on to other things, it made no difference. He continued to rise, and he was very close with Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and eventually now he's become head of the dicastery. So it's a mystery how someone with that kind of background at this point. Now, that said, the abuse crisis had not yet erupted the way it did here in the United States. But any sane leader of a diocese and of the whole church is going to take into account the character of the people that he appoints to very sensitive, very powerful positions. And in this case, it is just eye-popping that this comes out now. And by the way, people are trying to portray this as a hit, a personal hit against him.
Yeah.
Well, no. You don't look at somebody unless with this degree of scrutiny, unless they are in a very powerful situation. And I think that as people begin to comb back through his other publications, we may see some other surprises as well.
This would make Jackie Collins blush. This stuff is randy and filthy to the nth degree. Father, it appears that Fernandez tried to disappear this book. You can't find it in a used bookstore. It's nowhere to be found. The ISDN number's gone. My question is, might this have been a reason for his decision to no longer deal with abuse cases when he came to the dicastery of the doctrine of faith?
Yeah, it was very curious when he was appointed to that. He told the Pope that he didn't want to deal with those cases, and the Pope wrote a letter to him at that time saying that they would be handled by, the disciplinary section of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. But since he dabbles in pornography, he's obviously someone who would feel a little uncomfortable in having to judge people who do the same when they're committing crimes against minors. So how can we can you imagine any other organization, the head of its integrity section, having someone who displays this complete lack of good sense and, in fact, displays something that would be done by people, we call them pornographers in the back alleys in the old days. These are shameful acts being described for public consumption, and Fernandez then has the preposterous claim that this is all part of a spirituality for couples. Nonsense. This is paganism.
Yeah, no, I have to say, I was shocked, not by the descriptions. Look, we've all read these words. We're adults. We see this. The problem, the thing that struck me, it made me feel, frankly, sick to my stomach. It's blasphemous because you're not just saying, oh, look, here's two people having a sexual act. It's Jesus as one of the participants. This is really mind-boggling and mind-blowing, frankly, that anybody would even conjure such things, much less give word to them. Bob, I'll give you the last word on this topic.
Yeah, and I mean, to add a rather disgusting detail, I don't know why you bring forward that story, first of all, in any kind of context.
No.
But he says that the girl reports that the Blessed Mother was looking on approvingly as this happened.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's like a sexual twisted fantasia. And anybody who thinks this way, I think you've got to really question what else are they thinking and why would you make that person head of your doctrinal office globally? I want to move on to the growing resistance to the Vatican directive, which is kind of the piece de resistance of this dicastery on doctrine. It's the blessing of same-sex couples or those in irregular situations, divorced and remarried Catholics without an annulment. 9 Catholic dioceses in France are rejecting the document, and the former head of the dicastery for divine worship and the discipline of the sacraments, Cardinal Robert Sarah, is issuing a strong rejection of the document. He writes, "We do not oppose Pope Francis, but we firmly and radically oppose a heresy that seriously undermines the Church, the body of Christ, because it is contrary to the Catholic faith and tradition." Father, papal apologist Austin Ivory wrote this week that Cardinal Sarah has accused the Pope of heresy and thus has violated his oath of loyalty to the Pope, and he should give up his red hat. Your thoughts on what Cardinal Sarah actually said there, and what does it mean canonically?
Yeah, Cardinal Sarah is expressing the common opinion of people who look at this document and compare it with what's been taught by every pope up till this moment, and saying that this is not true. There are heretical teachings contained in Fiducia Supplicans. Now, this document was issued under the title of the or the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith, and then in it we find Pope Francis's signature, and Cardinal Fernandez says the Pope approved it. So, you know, in reality, it's the document of the dicastery, but the Pope approved it, and his name appears on it, so he's giving his approval to what's said in it. So sad to say, the Pope has approved something that he never should have, because it teaches wrongly that the Catholic Church considers homosexual couples a worthy subject to receive a blessing as couples. That is horrible. That's teaching basically that the mortal sin committed by homosexuals is not a big deal. And in fact, they deserve a blessing. And it's equating them to all other couples, married couples, engaged couples, by calling them couples. They're not couples. They're two people who are misusing their bodies with each other. This has nothing to do with how a couple is conceived in Catholic theology.
Bob, Ivory goes to great pains to try to say that Cardinal Sarah is calling the Pope a heretic. That is not what he did. He said that this teaching is heresy. What's the difference?
Well, look, as we know, there's been this pile-up of are we blessing unions? Are we blessing couples? Are we blessing individuals? And for me, at this point, I mean, that debate can go on till the end of time, and it really doesn't make all that much of a difference right now. Yes, there is a formal reaffirmation that only sex within a Christian marriage is permissible. But I forget who said this, and I apologize to whoever it was, because it's a great image. Someone wrote that saying to try to keep this distinction that we haven't formally said that that's okay. It's like when you go out on a blind date and someone asks you, "How did it go?" and you said the food at the restaurant was terrific. Well, yeah, I mean you've told a truth, but you haven't actually dealt with the backstory that's out there. And I just wrote about this the other day at the Catholic thing. I think that when we want to judge what does this actually mean in action, we have to look at the fruits of what is produced. It's not only in France. It's all over Africa. You know, it's in Hungary, it's in Poland, it's in all these different places. Hundreds of priests in England, hundreds of priests in Spain are protesting this, and they won't do these blessings. So what are the fruits of this? The fruits of this aren't an outreach of charity to these so-called irregular couples. It is chaos, it's confusion, it's conflict within the Church, and that has to be a judgment about the prudence, even over and above the theological questions, the prudence of issuing this at this moment in history.
Cardinal Sarah also condemns compromise with the world in terms of morality. He quotes Pope Francis in his own words, where the Pope says the devil is the divider, and that this document is causing seeming division to bless sin. I'll get both of you to react to that. But Father, Ivory perhaps is speaking once again as the unofficial spokesman for the Pope. Might this be a warning shot to Cardinal Sarah? Could he be the next Cardinal Burke?
Well, I hope not, because Cardinal Sarah's only done his duty as a cardinal to uphold the Catholic faith. And Cardinal Fernandez has not upheld the Catholic faith with fiducia supplicans, and the Pope has not upheld the Catholic faith with fiducia supplicans. We have to be very frank and blunt here that all of these bishops in Africa are not mistaken in what they understand this document to mean. You'll recall that Father James Martin, a day after this came out, had his picture in the New York Times, where was a reporter conveniently invited, when he blessed two homosexuals who we find out are civilly married. Those two homosexuals consider themselves to be married. You know what that means? They don't believe the Catholic doctrine on marriage, that only a man and a woman can marry. So here are two people who are living in an immoral relationship, who implicit or explicitly reject Catholic doctrine by the way they live, and now they're being blessed. When you see that being done by a priest, by the way, no wonder the bishops in the world are looking at us and, wait a minute, when in the history of the Catholic Church did we ever say God will favor people who commit unnatural sex acts with each other, consider themselves to be married, and we're just going to give them a blessing as if they were married? All the while saying we're not really blessing their union because a union is different than a couple. Nonsense. It's not a marriage. Absolutely, it can't be. But when people are deluded and think they're married, we shouldn't contribute to that delusion by this nonsense of blessing them.
You'd have to be very, very naive. I don't want to say dense necessarily, not to think that there was going to be a huge reaction from the bishops.
Yeah.
Now, Cardinal Fernandez says in his clarification about the original document that bishops cannot say that it is theologically wrong because they've reaffirmed marriage. However, what we have going on here is an abuse I would have to say, at both ends, because in the other way, we have priests out there who are going to be put in very, very difficult circumstances for not doing what we just saw in that photograph. And look, we have to also bring up the fact that lots of bishops, lots of priests, maybe even lots of cardinals are laying low at this point.
Yes,
I mean, the braver ones and the ones who are in situations in Africa where they know that the Muslims and
it's life or death.
and the evangelicals and the other Protestant sects are just waiting for them to make this move, to move in on their people.
Yep.
There have to be vast swaths of people who are staying quiet for the time being. There is a massive resistance to this, and I think the Vatican at some point is going to have to find a way to exit from the place that it's gotten itself into.
Father, what do you make of the optics here? I mean, as we were discussing a moment ago, aren't these wedding blessings inevitable? How long before church blessings prohibited, the limitations on these blessings are completely disregarded? I know they can't wear the same outfits and they can't be in a church setting, but remember, Vatican II said you were supposed to sing Latin in the new Mass. That was dropped too.
Yeah, this is all meaningless, Raymond. Restrictions on what kind of clothing you can wear, what you can do. Cardinal Fernandez says the casual or non-liturgical blessing only take 10 or 15 seconds, et cetera, et cetera. This is all nonsense. What's really at stake here is, does the Catholic Church consider homosexual activity, sodomy, to be a mortal sin? Do people who promise to commit this sin with each other on an ongoing basis, are they blessable in that promise, in that relationship? The Vatican has said yes. The Vatican may deny it by saying we don't bless unions, we only bless couples. That's double talk. The only reason they're considered a couple is because they've united themselves to each other through their own intention, and in many cases through getting a civil marriage. So, no, what's inevitably going to happen here is that the Catholic bishops and faithful of the world have to tell the Holy See, we do not believe that immorality is blessable, and therefore we reject this innovation. This innovation of a blessing of what's immoral will not stand, and that's got to be quite crystal clear to Pope Francis and the others. And that's an act of charity, by the way. If the Pope or any of his assistants make a mistake, to keep your mouth shut and pretend they're right is wrong. To tell them with charity, but with forthrightness, you've made a mistake here, Holy Father, that's the charity. That's the charity that St. Paul showed to St. Peter.
Archbishop Charles Chiluna, who is a senior advisor to the Pope, he's an adjunct secretary of the doctrinal office. This week, he's calling for the Church to rethink its stance on celibacy. Here's the quote. This is probably the first time I'm saying it publicly, and it will sound heretical to some people. If it were up to me, I would revise the requirement that priests have to be celibate. Experience has shown me that this is something we need to seriously think about. Archbishop Charles Chiluna, what are we seeing here? I mean, is it just that everyone is watching the clock and it's about to run out on this papacy? So it's like the blue light synodal special. We got to get all we can before the light turns out?
Yeah, I think this is a further compromise, to use that term that you invoked earlier, that somehow these people kind of think that Catholicism doesn't work, that the practices and the disciplines that we've had in the past simply don't work. I think that's a false assessment of where things are. But to change the nature of the priesthood is not necessarily heretical. Yeah. The Eastern churches, of course, have married priests, not married bishops, but married priests. But I think that this might be a trial balloon that maybe some people in the Vatican want to see. The Holy Father, surprisingly, if you remember, during the synod on the Amazon, was edging toward that, but kind of rejected it. But he tends to do this. He tends to himself or let other people have these trial balloons and then see where things go. I just find this to be a further weakening. It sends out the message that the Catholic Church really wants to get on board with where the sexual revolution has gone in the West. It hasn't gone there in Africa and not even in Latin America. So I mean, this is the leading edge of yet maybe the next step that may be tried.
Father, as Bob said, many people don't realize, I'll bet some of our viewers, in the Eastern branch of the Catholic Church, there are married priests, as there are on the ordinariate. But why the urgency, and who is pushing this?
Well, I was very surprised when Archbishop Chiluna said that, but I do recall what Bob just said at the Synod on the Amazon. That was on the agenda, ordaining married men. They were going to be older men, so they were trying to, ease it in by saying only the older folks will get ordained. But then you may recall Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict Emeritus published a book in defense of priestly celibacy. And that book was tremendous. It was prophetic. It was a beautiful defense of priestly celibacy as coming from Christ. That Christ is a celibate, and so are his priests who represent him. So anyway, that died. It went nowhere, and now it's coming back on the agenda. This, as Bob said, this is caving into the world, pretending that the Catholic faith and life can't work in the modern world. It's just the exact opposite. Wherever Catholicism is taken seriously, the seminaries are full. Africa, I know from experience dealing with African priests, some of the seminaries have to turn men away because there aren't enough spaces there.
Right.
How about the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Latin Mass groups? They're often turning away candidates. They don't have enough room. So where Catholicism is vigorous, orthodox, robust, traditional, things go well. And we ought to think about that because, Archbishop Chikluna's recipe here would be a total disaster. Yeah. It would destroy, in the popular appreciation, the Catholic Church is teaching that giving up sex for the sake of the kingdom of God is a blessed and holy thing, and it's very possible. It's been done for 2,000 years. He would basically say, it doesn't work anymore, let's get rid of it. No, wrong. He's got the wrong idea here.
Pope Francis, in his homily on the Feast of the Epiphany, had this to say about what he labels ecclesiastical ideologies. Instead of splitting into groups based on our own ideas, we are called to put God back at the center. We need to let go of ecclesiastical ideologies so that we can discover the meaning of Holy Mother Church, the ecclesial habitus. Ecclesiastical ideologies, no. Ecclesial vocation, yes. The Lord, not our own ideas or our own projects, must be at the center. Bob, just what are ideological or ecclesiastical ideologies? What does the Pope mean by this?
Well, it might be cynical to say the things that he doesn't like that are going on in the church. But look, toward the end of the year, he said some striking things. I mean, just this past week, he condemned surrogacy.
Yes, he did.
He spoke out about abortion toward the end of the year, and other things like that. I really think that the way around so-called ideologies of the left and the right is to go back to Catholicism, to recognize that we need a redefinition, especially on these sexual matters. We need a document like, God help us, Amoris Laetitia, that actually confronts the very vigorous, militant, pro-abortion, pro-homosexual, sexual revolution currents that exist in our developed nations at this point. That's really where the battle to move off of ideologies is going to be solved. Now, he may regard that as playing to one wing in the church, but that's the center of the church. Affirming families, affirming societies that depend on virtuous families and virtuous individuals. That's the true way to get beyond ideology, in my estimation.
But, Father, I want to bring you in on this. Wouldn't synodality be considered an ecclesiastical ideology? Well, I mean, what about holding on to church teaching and doctrine? Is that an ideology now? What does he mean by ecclesiastical ideology? That's not right or left. That's something other.
Well, we don't really know because he hasn't told us. I mean, if he uses the plural, so that means an ideology commonly means a set of ideas. So if there are sets of ideas that he doesn't believe are compatible with the Catholic faith, tell us what they are. Warn, the shepherd should warn the sheep what to avoid. Synodality, in effect, has become, though, in my opinion, an ideology because there's no history in the Catholic Church of what we saw in last October, where the bishops of the Catholic Church sit down with lay people and they have an equal vote in trying to come up with a pastoral program to guide the church in the modern era. And by the way, about synodality, isn't it fascinating? At the synod, they were going to talk about homosexuality. It never made it to the final discussion or report. And suddenly it gets sprung on us here just before Christmas that homosexual couples can be blessed. Well, Fernandez tells us in Fiducia that this document was under discussion while the synod was going on. So there's a cynical game going on here where they say we're going to talk about something and bring it, to the people of God and for their consideration. They never tell us they've got a document already in the works that they're going to publish. For me, the way the Holy See has conducted itself within the last 6 months has been disedifying, disheartening, discouraging, and it certainly is not bringing the unity of the faith or the dynamic mission of the church to bring the truth of Christ to the world. We seem to be aping the world and trying to give them everything they want.
Yeah, and pulling political games and Swifties behind the scenes on people. And we're going to bring it, we're going to let everybody have their voice heard, and then we're just going to do it in the dead of night, and here you go. It's done. Agree. Obey. Before we run out of time, I want to talk about the number of U.S. sees that could become vacant soon, prompting new appointments by Pope Francis. Cardinal Sean O'Malley in Boston is 79. Cardinal Timothy Dolan in New York, 73. Detroit, Cincinnati, Mobile, Milwaukee, Galveston, Houston, all could be up for appointments very soon. Those who Pope Francis enjoys and likes the company of, they're allowed to stay. But those he does not favor tend to be replaced at lightning speed. Bob, given what we have been seeing with the men Francis has chosen in recent days, what do you foresee?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough time in the next couple of years as far as these appointments go, because although Francis has tried to lift up the peripheries, which means people who are not really in the kind of progressive mode in the church, when it comes to appointments here in the United States, some of them I think have been good. A small number have been good, which is to say non-progressive, I think more orthodox in their orientation. But by and large, the people in the most important sees have tended to be along this progressive line, a kind of a synodal line, and I think that we're going to see people, particularly for this country, I don't know exactly who he listens to. We might speculate about who that is, but
who's on the bishop's congregation?
But
Supich and
but whoever it is that he listens to, in particular here in the United States, by and large, he's been appointing people of that more progressive direction. Mm-hmm. And given that most of our bishops are still in the JP2 and Benedict mold, even within the church, this is going to cause tensions. Yeah. And then in terms of the way publicly Catholicism presents itself, you have to think, if our bishops had been strong enough not to allow the Nancy Pelosi's and the Joe Bidens to go on their merry way as Catholics promoting abortion and homosexuality and all sorts, trans people and whatnot, America might actually have been different, but our bishops didn't hold the line on that, and we're paying the price for it right now.
But Father, I'm going to give you the last word. How might these appointments change the face of the church, not only in the United States, globally, and what impact could all of the stories we've been discussing tonight have on the next conclave?
Well, yes, certainly these are important sees that are going to be new nominations, new bishops being put there, particularly cardinalatial sees, New York and Boston. Detroit was formerly a cardinalatial see. Houston is, Houston Galveston. So, yeah, if the Pope, is more robust and healthy than, people think, that he's in declining health, but if he lasts for a couple of more years, we're going to have a whole new set of bishops and archbishops who have great importance. Now, what I think on the conclave question, whenever that happens, the battle lines are drawn between those who support the notion that Catholic teaching on sexual morality is inadequate and needs to be updated and changed, and that's basically what they're saying here as regards blessing homosexual couples, and those who say, no, we can't do that. And I foresee that the next conclave is going to be very tense in the discussions beforehand. Certainly the media circus is going to be quite active. But I think it'll be a moment where people, who look to the gospel and to Christ as the center of our religion are going to say, what are we doing to promote the faith of our fathers as opposed what has been done recently to accommodate to the world? And we have to take that first course. We have to find out how it is that we can reorient the church in a way that the gospel is first and not these secular concerns pleasing the world.
Gentlemen, we will leave it there for commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, and regular podcasts. Visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you, gentlemen.